The old upright piano arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mei-Lin, blind since birth, was just 7 years old when her grandmother arranged for the second-hand instrument to be delivered to their small apartment. No one expected that this weather-beaten piano with slightly uneven keys would change her life forever. "What's that sound?" Mei-Lin asked, her small head turning toward the door as the delivery men struggled to navigate the narrow hallway. The heavy thud and scrape of wood against the worn floor tiles created a strange symphony of its own. "It's a piano. Little one," her grandmother explained, gently guiding Mei-Lin's hands to touch the wooden case. "It belonged to an old friend who doesn't play anymore." Mei-Lin's fingers trailed across the cool surface, exploring every curve and corner. When she reached the keyboard, she pressed a single key, and the clear note hung in the air of their modest living room. Her face lit up with a smile that seemed to brighten the entire apartment. "Can I try more?" she asked, already sliding onto the bench before getting an answer. Her parents exchanged worried glances over her head. Money was always tight in their household. Her father worked double shifts at the factory, and her mother cleaned offices in the evenings. Piano lessons were a luxury they couldn't afford, but neither had the heart to say no when they saw the joy on their daughter's face. "Of course you can try," her mother said, "but we should probably talk about lessons another time." What happened next stunned everyone in the room. Mei-Lin placed both hands on the keyboard and began to play. Not random notes or childish plinking, but a simple melody she had heard on the radio that morning. Her small fingers found the right keys almost instinctively, as if they had always known where to go. "How is she doing that?" her father whispered, his voice barely audible. Her grandmother shook her head in wonder. "Some people are just born with gifts." For the next few days, Mei-Lin was inseparable from the piano. She would sit for hours, playing songs she had heard and creating new melodies of her own. The piano seemed to speak a language that made perfect sense to her, despite never having had a single lesson. The apartment building where they lived was old and the walls were thin. The sounds of Mei-Lin's playing drifted through the building, catching the attention of their neighbors. Some complained about the noise, but others found themselves pausing in the hallway to listen. One such neighbor was Mrs. Tanaka, a retired concert pianist who lived on the floor above. After hearing the same melodies for several days, curiosity got the better of her. She made her way downstairs and knocked on the family's door. "I couldn't help but notice the music coming from your apartment," Mrs. Tanaka said when Mei-Lin's mother answered. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but who is playing?" Mei-Lin's mother hesitated before responding. "It's my daughter. She's only 7 and we just got the piano." "I'm sorry if it's been too loud." Mrs. Tanaka shook her head quickly. No, that's not why I'm here. The playing. It's remarkable for someone with no training. May I come in and listen?" Reluctantly, Mei-Lin's mother opened the door wider and led Mrs. Tanaka to the living room where Mei-Lin sat at the piano, her fingers dancing across the keys. Mrs. Tanaka watched in silence, her trained eye noticing the unusual way Mei-Lin positioned her hands. It wasn't the proper technique she had taught students for decades, but somehow the child was producing beautiful sounds nonetheless. "Mei-Lin," her mother called gently. "This is Mrs. Tanaka from upstairs. She wanted to hear you play." The little girl stopped abruptly, suddenly shy. "I'm sorry if I was too loud." "You weren't too loud at all," Mrs. Tanaka said, moving closer. "In fact, I'd love to hear more. Would you play something else for me?" Mei-Lin nodded and turned back to the piano. This time she played a complex piece she had heard on her grandmother's old radio, a simplified version of a classical melody, but recognizable nonetheless. Mrs. Tanaka's eyes widened. "That's Chopin. How did you learn to play that?" "I just listened to it," Mei-Lin replied with the simple honesty of childhood. "The notes feel right under my fingers." It was then that Mrs. Tanaka noticed Mei-Lin wasn't looking at the keys or at anything in particular. "Can she see the keyboard?" she asked quietly. "No," her father answered from the doorway where he had been watching. "Mei-Lin has been blind since birth." Understanding dawned on Mrs. Tanaka's face. "Perfect pitch," she murmured, "and exceptional audio memory. These are rare gifts in anyone, but especially remarkable in a child so young." She sat down next to Mei-Lin on the piano bench. "Would you like to learn how to play properly?" "I could teach you." Mei-Lin's face lit up, but her expression quickly fell. "Papa says lessons cost too much money." Mrs. Tanaka looked at Mei-Lin's parents. "I used to teach at the conservatory before I retired. It would be my pleasure to give Mei-Lin lessons." No charge. We couldn't possibly accept, her father began. Please, Mrs. Tanaka interrupted. I haven't had a student with this much natural talent in all my years of teaching. It would be a tragedy not to nurture it. After much discussion, Mei-Lin's parents reluctantly agreed, and so began the routine that would shape Mei-Lin's childhood. Every afternoon after school, she would sit at the piano with Mrs. Tanaka, learning proper hand positions, scales, and theory. Unlike most children, Mei-Lin never complained about practice. The piano wasn't just an instrument to her, it was a window to a world she could fully experience, a language she inherently understood. Mrs. Tanaka was a strict teacher, but she recognized that Mei-Lin's approach to music was different. Rather than force traditional methods, she adapted her teaching to complement Mei-Lin's unique abilities. Music isn't just in the notes on a page, Mrs. Tanaka explained one afternoon, guiding Mei-Lin's hands over the keys. It's in the spaces between them, in the way one note flows into another. Some musicians spend their whole lives trying to understand this. You already do. As months passed, Mei-Lin's skills improved dramatically. She learned to read music in Braille, but often preferred playing by ear. Her memory storing complex pieces after just a few listens. Word of the blind girl with extraordinary talent began to spread throughout their neighborhood. Neighbors who had once complained about the noise now requested specific songs. When they passed Mei-Lin in the hallway, the principal at Mei-Lin's school heard about her ability and invited her to play at a small school assembly. It would be her first public performance. The night before the assembly, Mei-Lin couldn't sleep. She sat at her piano, softly playing the piece she had chosen, her fingers trembling slightly. What if I make a mistake? She asked when her grandmother came to check on her. Her grandmother sat beside her on the bench. Do you know why music touches people's hearts, little one? Mei-Lin shook her head, because it's honest. When you play, you're sharing a piece of your soul. And souls aren't perfect, they're real. If you play from your heart, even the mistakes become part of the beauty. The next day, Mei-Lin sat on the stage of her school auditorium, the same upright piano having been carefully transported from her apartment. The room fell silent as she was led to the bench. For a moment she froze, overwhelmed by the presence of so many people she couldn't see, but could sense all around her. Then she remembered her grandmother's words, took a deep breath and began to play. The piece was a simple melody she had composed herself, inspired by the sounds of rain on the apartment windows. As her fingers moved across the keys, she forgot about the audience, lost in the world of sound she was creating. When the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then came the applause, thunderous, unexpected, filled with genuine emotion. Mei-Lin sat stunned, not fully understanding the impact her playing had made. Her music teacher hurried to the stage, her voice thick with emotion. That was extraordinary, Mei-Lin. You've left us all speechless. It was the first time Mei-Lin realized that her music could touch others the way it touched her. As her parents helped her from the stage, whispers followed them. Did you hear that? How does she play like that? I've never heard anything so beautiful. That night, as Mei-Lin lay in bed, she replayed the day's events in her mind. The applause still echoed in her ears, but more important was the feeling she'd had while playing, a sense of complete freedom and connection. Mama, she called softly when her mother came to kiss her goodnight. I want to play piano forever. Her mother stroked her hair gently. Then that's what you'll do, my brave girl. Neither of them could have imagined just how far Mei-Lin's talent would take her, or the challenges that lay ahead. But in that moment, in the quiet of her bedroom with the echo of applause still fresh in her memory, the future seemed full of endless possibility. The journey of the blind, pianist who would one day leave the world, speechless, had only just begun. Time passed quickly, for Mei-Lin. The small, upright piano that had once seemed so magnificent to her 7-year-old self now felt like an old friend with familiar quirks and imperfections. At 16, her fingers had grown longer, stronger, and even more skilled under Mrs. Tanaka's patient guidance. Their apartment hadn't changed much over the years. The same worn furniture, the same creaky floorboards, the same thin walls that carried the sound of her playing throughout the building. But the music that flowed from those walls had evolved into something extraordinary. Again, Mrs. Tanaka instructed, tapping lightly on Mei-Lin's wrist to correct her hand position. The passage requires more feeling. Technical perfection isn't enough. Maylin nodded and began the piece again. Rachmaninoff's prelude in G minor was challenging even for accomplished pianists, but she was determined to master it. As she played, she poured her frustrations and dreams into each note, letting the music speak the words she often couldn't find. When she finished, Mrs. Tanaka was silent for a long moment. "What's wrong?" Maylin asked, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. "Nothing is wrong," Mrs. Tanaka replied softly. "That's exactly what I've been waiting to hear from you. You've stopped playing the notes and started making music." A small smile crossed Maylin's face. From Mrs. Tanaka, this was the highest praise. "I think you're ready," Mrs. Tanaka continued. "Ready for what?" "The National Young Musicians Competition. The deadline for applications is next week." Maylin's hands fell into her lap. "But that's for students from the big music schools." "I'm just what?" Mrs. Tanaka interrupted. "Just the most talented student I've ever taught. Just a young woman with a gift that deserves to be heard." Maylin shook her head. "You know what I mean. The judges won't take me seriously. They never do." Her words weren't without reason. The previous year, she had auditioned for the prestigious City Music Academy, only to be met with polite rejections. "While your playing shows promise," one letter had read when her mother translated it, "we have concerns about the practical challenges of professional training for someone with your unique situation." Mrs. Tanaka made a sound of disapproval. "Then we'll make them take you seriously. Your playing speaks for itself." After much persuasion, Maylin agreed to enter the competition. The application required a video audition, which her younger brother Tao helped create using a borrowed camera. They recorded in the school music room one Sunday afternoon, taking advantage of the better acoustics and the slightly less worn piano. "That's the one," Mrs. Tanaka said after the fifth take. "It's perfect." Tao, now 13 and endlessly supportive of his sister, nodded in agreement as he stopped the recording. "They'd be crazy not to pick you, sis." Maylin smiled in his direction. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." The waiting was the hardest part. Each day after school, Maylin would ask if any mail had arrived, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. After 3 weeks, her mother met her at the door with an envelope. "It's from the competition," she said, placing it in Maylin's hands. Maylin's fingers trembled as they ran over the envelope. "You read it," she said, holding it out. "I can't." Her mother carefully opened the letter and began to read. Her sharp intake of breath made Maylin's heart sink. "What does it say?" she asked, preparing for disappointment. "You've been accepted as a finalist," her mother replied, her voice filled with disbelief and pride. "You're to perform live in 3 weeks at the Grand Hall." The news spread quickly through their building. Neighbors who had watched Maylin grow up stopped her family in the hallways to offer congratulations. Mrs. Tanaka immediately increased their practice schedule, pushing Maylin harder than ever before. "This is your chance," she told her student, "not just to win, but to show everyone who doubted you what you're truly capable of." The day before the competition, Maylin practiced for 8 straight hours, stopping only when her fingers began to cramp. Her father, returning from his late shift, found her still at the piano. "Enough for tonight," he said gently. "Even the most beautiful flowers need rest to bloom." Maylin reluctantly left the piano, her mind still racing with the notes of her competition piece. As she prepared for bed, a sudden wave of doubt washed over her. "Papa," she called as he passed her bedroom door. "What if they're only letting me play because they feel sorry for me?" "The blind girl who tries so hard?" Her father sat on the edge of her bed, his voice serious. "Listen to me. In this world, people will always have opinions about what you can and cannot do, but their opinions don't define you. Your courage does." He took her hands in his, the hands that had worked factory machines for a decade to support his family. "These hands of yours, they speak a language most people will never understand. Don't you dare apologize for that gift." The Grand Hall lived up to its name. Built in the previous century, it had hosted some of the most renowned musicians in the world. Now Maylin would join them, her name on the same program, her fingers on the same stage. Backstage was chaos, nervous contestants warming up, parents giving last-minute advice, teachers making adjustments to bow ties and dresses. Maylin stood quietly with Mrs. Tanaka, taking it all in with her ears rather than her eyes. "There are 13 other finalists," Mrs. Tanaka whispered, "most from the national academies." Maylin nodded, her stomach tight with nerves. She was wearing a dress her mother had saved for months to buy, simple but elegant. deep blue with small pearl buttons down the back. Contestant number 8. Mei-Lin Chen, a voice called. Mrs. Tanaka squeezed her arm. Remember what we practiced. The piano is the same, no matter where it stands. A stage assistant led Mei-Lin to the grand piano that dominated the center of the stage. The walk felt endless, each step taking her further from safety and closer to judgment. She could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching her. Hear the subtle shift of bodies in seats, the occasional cough or program rustling. When her fingers first touched the keys, they were ice cold. She took a deep breath, remembering her father's words, her grandmother's wisdom, Mrs. Tanaka's belief in her. Then she began to play. The piece was Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, a composition that told a story without words, a journey of light and shadow, hope and despair, ending in a passionate storm of notes that required both technical precision and emotional depth. As she played, the audience faded away. The judges' table disappeared. Even her nervousness melted into the music. There was only Mei-Lin and the piano, speaking to each other in their private language. When the final notes faded into silence, she sat still, hands resting lightly on the keys. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she had actually finished playing or if she was still lost in the music. Then came the applause. It started slowly, almost hesitantly, then built into something powerful. She stood, bowing toward the sound as Mrs. Tanaka had taught her, before being guided back off stage. That was, Mrs. Tanaka began, her usual composure cracking. In 30 years of teaching, I've never heard it played like that. The remaining contestants performed, but backstage was buzzing with whispers about the blind girl's performance. Some of the other teachers approached Mrs. Tanaka with congratulations, while a few contestants watched Mei-Lin with a mixture of admiration and competitive concern. The judges deliberated for nearly an hour. When they returned, the head judge, a stern-faced man who had been a concert pianist himself in his younger days, stepped to the microphone. Before we announce the results, he said, I would like to say that the level of talent we witnessed today gives me great hope for the future of classical music in our country. He proceeded to announce the third-place winner, a boy from the National Conservatory, then the second-place winner, a girl who had been playing since she was 3. Mei-Lin held her breath, her hand finding Mrs. Tanaka's and squeezing tightly. The first-place winner of this year's National Young Musicians Competition, the judge announced, is Mei-Lin Chen. The audience erupted in applause. Mrs. Tanaka let out a small cry of joy. Mei-Lin stood frozen in disbelief until her teacher gently pushed her toward the stage as she accepted the award, a scholarship to study at any music school of her choice. The head judge leaned close to her. Young lady, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. You made me forget you couldn't see. All I could hear was what you could do. That night, as her family celebrated in their small apartment with neighbors crowding in to offer congratulations, Mei-Lin sat quietly at her old, upright piano. Her fingers traced the familiar chips and scratches on its wooden case. Thank you, she whispered to it, knowing how far they had come together. The trophy sat on top of the piano, catching the light. But more valuable than the trophy or even the scholarship was the knowledge that when the world heard her play, they didn't see a blind girl at the piano, they just saw Mei-Lin, the musician who made them feel. 6 years had passed since Mei-Lin won the National Young Musicians Competition. The scholarship had opened doors, allowing her to study at the prestigious Central Conservatory of Music, where professors quickly recognized her exceptional talent. Yet despite her impressive academic achievements, the professional music world remained hesitant to fully embrace a blind pianist. Now 23, Mei-Lin sat in the small music studio where she taught piano to neighborhood children. The studio was nothing fancy, just a converted storage room with soundproofing panels her brother Tao had helped install, 2 upright pianos and a few chairs. But it was hers, a space where she could share her love of music without facing the skepticism of concert hall directors. That's it. Lily, feel the rhythm in your hands, not just your head, she encouraged her 10-year-old student. Music isn't just about playing the right notes, it's about making them dance. Lily's small fingers moved more confidently across the keys, the simple melody taking on new life with her improved timing. Much better. You've been practicing, Mei-Lin said when Lily finished. Every day, just like you told me to, Lily replied proudly. My mom says I'm driving everyone crazy, Mei-Lin laughed. That's how you know you're doing it right. The greatest musicians always drive someone crazy. After Lily left, Maylin remained at the piano, working on a piece she was preparing for a small local concert next month. It wasn't the grand performance she had once dreamed of, but she had made peace with the reality of her situation. She had students who adored her, occasional gigs at community events, and the respect of those who had actually heard her play. Her phone rang, interrupting her practice. The electronic voice announced an unknown number. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "Is this Maylin Chen?" a woman's voice asked, slightly breathless. "Yes, this is she. My name is Director Wu from the National Symphony Foundation. I'm calling because we have an unusual situation and your name came up in our discussion." Maylin's fingers instinctively pressed against the piano keys beside her, not hard enough to make a sound. "What kind of situation?" "The foundation is hosting a charity concert this Saturday for music education in rural areas. Our headline performer, Pianist Huang, has just canceled due to a family emergency. We need a replacement, and urgently." "And how exactly did my name come up?" Maylin asked, trying to keep the skepticism from her voice. This wouldn't be the first time someone had considered her for a special interest segment of a show, more as a curiosity than a serious musician. "Professor Zhang from the conservatory is on our board. When we needed suggestions for last-minute replacements, he showed us a recording of your graduate recital. Your interpretation of Rachmaninoff was, well, quite frankly, it was extraordinary." Maylin remained silent, processing the information. Professor Zhang had always been kind to her, one of the few faculty members who treated her exactly the same as his sighted students. Director Wu continued, "I understand this is incredibly short notice. The concert is in 3 days, but we would be honored if you would consider performing." "What's the program?" Maylin asked, her practical side taking over despite the shock. Pianist Huang was scheduled to perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the orchestra. "If that's not in your current repertoire, we could certainly discuss alternatives." Maylin's heart raced. Rachmaninoff's Second was one of the most challenging piano concertos ever written, a piece she had studied and loved but never performed with a full orchestra. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I know the piece," she said slowly, "but performing it with an orchestra with only 3 days to prepare, we understand it's a lot to ask. The foundation would cover all your expenses, of course, and there's a standard performer's fee. We can arrange transportation, accommodation, whatever you need." Maylin's mind was already racing ahead, calculating practice hours, considering the adjustments needed to perform with an orchestra rather than solo. "Could I call you back in an hour?" she asked. "I need to check a few things." After hanging up, Maylin immediately called Mrs. Tanaka, who, despite being well into her 70s, remained her most trusted advisor. "The National Symphony Foundation?" Mrs. Tanaka repeated after Maylin explained the situation. "This is no small opportunity, Maylin. Their annual charity concert is broadcast nationwide. But 3 days to prepare for Rachmaninoff's Second with an orchestra I've never worked with? It seems impossible." "Impossible?" Mrs. Tanaka scoffed. "Was it impossible when you taught yourself to play by ear as a child? Was it impossible when you won that competition against students from the top academies in the country? Your entire life has been about doing what others call impossible." Maylin smiled at her teacher's familiar fire. "You think I should do it. I think you should stop doubting yourself and call them back immediately before they find someone else." An hour later, Maylin had rearranged her teaching schedule, packed a small suitcase, and was in a taxi heading to the National Symphony Hall for her first meeting with Director Wu and the orchestra conductor. The hall was even larger than she had imagined, her footsteps echoing as she was led through the space. The grand piano on stage was a Steinway concert grand, its sound rich and resonant when she tested a few keys. "We'll have a full rehearsal tomorrow morning," Conductor Lee explained. "Today, perhaps you'd like some time alone with the piano to get acquainted?" "That would be perfect," Maylin replied, already settling onto the bench. "Could you tell me exactly where the orchestra will be positioned around me? I need to create a mental map." For the next several hours, Maylin immersed herself in the concerto, her fingers flying over the keys as she reacquainted herself with every passage. The hall's acoustics were magnificent, allowing her to hear nuances in her playing that even she hadn't noticed before. When she finally paused, her hands aching pleasantly from the intensive practice, she realized someone was listening. "That was remarkable," Conductor Lee said from somewhere to her left. "You play as if you've performed this piece 100 times with an orchestra." "Only in my mind," Maylin admitted. I've studied orchestral recordings to understand where the piano and orchestra intersect, where they converse with each other. Well, your mental orchestra plays beautifully, he said with a chuckle. I hope we can live up to them tomorrow. The next morning's rehearsal began tentatively. The orchestra, comprised of some of the finest musicians in the country, was wary of the last-minute replacement, particularly one who couldn't see their conductor's cues. We'll need to establish some audio cues for entries, Conductor Lee explained to the orchestra. Ms. Chen will rely on her hearing rather than sight. The first run-through was rough with timing issues and missed entries. Mei Lin could feel the musician's frustration, which only intensified her own. During a break, the first violinist approached her. It's not working, she said bluntly. Perhaps we should consider a simpler piece. Mei Lin straightened her shoulders. The piece isn't the problem. We just need to find our rhythm together. She turned toward where she knew Conductor Lee was standing. Instead of trying to make me follow traditional visual cues, could we try something different? Let the orchestra follow my lead on the solo sections, and I'll follow the orchestra's sound during the tutti sections. The conductor was quiet for a moment. It's unconventional, but let's try it. They began again, this time with Mei Lin setting the pace. She poured every ounce of her musicality into the performance, making the piano sing with emotion while staying acutely attuned to the orchestra's every breath and bow stroke. By the end of the day, something magical had happened. The initial awkwardness had transformed into a unique symbiosis. The orchestra had adapted to her, and she to them, creating a performance that felt both technically precise and emotionally spontaneous. I think we're ready, Conductor Lee said as the final notes faded. The orchestra members tapped their bows against their music stands, their way of applauding. The night before the concert, Mei Lin barely slept. She stayed in a hotel near the concert hall, spending hours at the piano in the practice room they had arranged for her, going over the most challenging passages again and again. Her phone rang just after midnight. You should be resting, Mrs. Tanaka scolded when she answered. I know, but there's this passage in the third movement that I'm still not completely comfortable with. Mei Lin, Mrs. Tanaka's voice softened. Do you remember what your grandmother told you before your first school performance? About why music touches people's hearts? Because it's honest, Mei Lin replied, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. Exactly. Tomorrow, whether every note is perfect or not, your honesty will shine through. Now go to sleep or your fingers will be too tired to play anything. The day of the concert arrived with a flurry of activity. Last-minute rehearsals, sound checks, an interview with a music journalist who seemed surprised by Mei Lin's articulate responses. Before she knew it, it was time. Backstage, Mei Lin could hear the murmur of the audience as they filled the hall. Someone mentioned the concert was sold out. Over 2,000 people waiting to hear her play. Panic suddenly gripped her. What had she been thinking, agreeing to this? She was a piano teacher who played small local concerts, not a soloist with a national orchestra. Conductor Lee found her sitting alone, her hands trembling slightly. Nervous? He asked. Terrified, she admitted. I keep thinking about all those people out there expecting to hear the great pianist Huang. True, he agreed. They came expecting one thing, but they're going to leave having experienced something far more extraordinary. They just don't know it yet. The orchestra began the opening piece, and all too soon it was time for Mei Lin's entrance. An assistant helped her to the stage, the applause polite but reserved as the audience noticed the unfamiliar replacement taking her place at the piano. The hall fell silent. Mei Lin placed her fingers on the keys, took a deep breath, and nodded to indicate she was ready. The moment the orchestra began the dark, swirling introduction of Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto, a strange calm settled over her. This was her element, her truest voice. As her hands joined the musical conversation, everything else faded away. There was only the music now, speaking through her fingers, telling its timeless story of struggle and triumph, darkness and light. The backstage area of the Grand Concert Hall hummed with activity. Stage hands rushed back and forth, making last-minute adjustments to the lighting. Orchestra members tuned their instruments, creating a beautiful chaos of sound that only musicians could appreciate. Nervous energy filled the air, but no one was more nervous than Mei Lin. She sat in a quiet corner, her fingers moving silently through passages of the Rachmaninoff Concerto. Even now, minutes before the performance, she was still memorizing, still perfecting. Her formal concert dress, a deep burgundy gown borrowed from the Foundation's wardrobe department, felt strange against her skin after years of performing in simple clothes at community centers and school auditoriums. 10 minutes to curtain. Ms. Chen, a stagehand called as he hurried past. Mei Lin nodded, her throat too dry to respond. The reality of what she was about to do crashed over her like a wave. 2,000 people. A professional orchestra. A piece that would challenge even the most experienced concert pianists. And she had prepared for just 3 days. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting the stage manager. Instead, the door opened to reveal her family, her parents, grandmother, and brother Tao. They had traveled all night to be here, arriving just in time for the concert. "We couldn't miss it," her mother said, rushing to embrace her. "Your first major concert." Her father's voice was thick with emotion. "We are so proud, daughter. The whole neighborhood is watching the broadcast together at Mrs. Tanaka's apartment," Tao added. She set up a projector in her living room. "Everyone's there. Even that grumpy man from the 3rd floor who used to complain about your practicing." Mei Lin laughed despite her nerves. "I wish Mrs. Tanaka could be here. She's the reason I can play at all." Her grandmother took Mei Lin's hands in her own. The old woman's fingers were gnarled with arthritis now, but still strong. "She is here in the most important way, in your music." A stagehand appeared at the door. 5 minutes, Ms. Chen. Your family can take their seats now." After a flurry of hugs and whispered good wishes, Mei Lin was alone again. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and reached for her cane. A moment later, there was another knock. "It's time," Conductor Li said gently. "Are you ready?" Was she ready? Mei Lin wasn't sure anyone could ever be truly ready for a moment like this, but she stood anyway, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Remember," the conductor said as they walked toward the stage. "We're making music together. You're not alone out there." The walk to the stage felt endless. Mei Lin could hear the audience, the rustle of programs, scattered coughing, the gradual hush as they noticed her entrance. She knew what they were seeing. A young blind woman being guided to the magnificent grand piano that dominated center stage. She could almost feel their curiosity, their uncertainty, perhaps even their lowered expectations. The assistant helped her to the piano bench, made sure she was properly positioned, then quietly retreated. The polite applause felt restrained, tinged with skepticism. Mei Lin heard whispers, some audience members clearly wondering who she was and what had happened to the famous pianist they had expected to see. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC's voice rang out. "Due to a family emergency, Pianist Huang sends his sincere regrets that he cannot perform tonight. We are fortunate to have with us instead a remarkable young talent, Ms. Mei Lin Chen, who will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor." More polite applause, even more whispers. Mei Lin's heart pounded so hard she was certain the front row must hear it. Her hands felt cold, her mouth dry. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if she could do this at all. The weight of the moment, her first professional orchestral performance, the difficult piece, the doubtful audience, seemed crushing. She had never felt more alone than she did sitting on that bench with 2,000 strangers watching her every move. Then, from the darkness of the hall, she heard a familiar sound, her grandmother's voice, quiet but clear. "From your heart, little one." The simple phrase, the same one her grandmother had told her before her very first school performance all those years ago, cut through her panic. Mei Lin's hands stopped trembling. She straightened her back, positioned her fingers over the keys, and nodded to Conductor Li. The orchestra began the famous opening chords, dark, brooding, filled with tension. Mei Lin listened, counting silently, feeling the music build around her. Then came her entrance, the piano responding to the orchestra's call with deep, resonant chords that seemed to rise from the very soul of the instrument. The first few measures were the most difficult, her fingers still adjusting to the unfamiliar piano, her ears still adapting to the hall's acoustics. But soon something remarkable began to happen. The boundary between Mei Lin and the music started to blur. She wasn't just playing the notes anymore. She was living them. Every crescendo became her own rising emotion. Every delicate passage reflected the fragility she had felt backstage. The dialogue between piano and orchestra became a conversation between her past and present. The little girl who had once discovered an old upright piano now commanding a concert grand on a professional stage. In the first movement, her technical precision impressed the audience. She could feel their surprise, hear the gradual shift from skepticism to attention in the quality of their silence. During the second movement, with its achingly beautiful melody, Mei-Lin allowed herself to become completely vulnerable. Her playing took on a quality that even she had never quite achieved before, a raw emotional honesty that came from accepting both her fear and her courage in this moment. Woman in the third row began to cry softly. An elderly man near the front forgot himself and whispered "beautiful," just loudly enough for Mei-Lin to hear. The orchestra members, usually focused solely on their own parts during a performance, found themselves watching her hands, moved by the story they were telling. Then came the third movement, fast, technically demanding, requiring absolute coordination between soloist and orchestra. Here was where all their rehearsal challenges could have fallen apart, but instead something magical happened. The orchestra didn't just play with Mei-Lin, they breathed with her. When she accelerated slightly in passages of growing intensity, they followed instinctively. When she lingered for a fraction of a second on a particularly expressive note, they waited. Conductor Lee later said it was like watching a flock of birds change direction in mid-flight. No visible signal, just a collective understanding of where the music needed to go. As the concerto built toward its powerful conclusion, Mei-Lin felt something she had never experienced before. The boundary between herself and the audience seemed to disappear. She wasn't performing for them anymore. They were all experiencing the music together, carried by the same current of emotion. Her fingers flew across the keys in the final passages, each note ringing with absolute clarity despite the speed and complexity. When she struck the final triumphant chord, the orchestra swelled around her, the sound filling every corner of the hall, vibrating through the floor beneath her feet, through the piano, through her very bones. Then came silence. Complete, perfect silence. For one terrible moment, Mei-Lin thought something had gone wrong. Had she missed a note? Had she misunderstood the audience's response throughout the performance? But then she realized what was happening. The audience was stunned into silence. The kind of silence that comes when people are afraid to breathe for fear of breaking a spell. 3 seconds passed. 5, 10. Then a single person began to clap. Another joined, then another, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the building. People rose to their feet. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Then everyone was shouting, applauding, stamping their feet. Conductor Lee came to the piano and took her hand, helping her to stand. "Take a bow," he whispered. "They're all standing for you." Mei-Lin bowed, her heart racing with a new kind of emotion, joy, gratitude, disbelief. The applause continued, showing no signs of stopping. She bowed again, then a third time. When she returned to center stage after her 5th bow, Conductor Lee leaned close to her ear. "They want an encore. It's unusual for a concerto performance, but do you have something prepared?" She hadn't prepared an encore. It hadn't even occurred to her that she might need one. But as the audience continued their enthusiastic appreciation, a piece came to mind. A simple, heartfelt Chopin nocturne that had been the first classical piece she had ever learned, taught to her by Mrs. Tanaka on that old upright piano. Mei-Lin nodded and returned to the piano. As soon as she sat down, the audience hushed immediately, eager to hear more. She began to play, her touch delicate, intimate, as if she were playing not for 2,000 people but for a single listener. The nocturne's gentle melody floated through the hall like a lullaby. After the emotional intensity of the Rachmaninoff, this simple, pure music touched the audience in a different way. It was like being allowed to glimpse Mei-Lin's musical soul, not the virtuoso who had just conquered one of the most challenging concertos in the repertoire, but the girl who simply loved making music. When she finished, the silence returned, but this time it was a different kind of silence, peaceful, contemplative like the hush after a gentle rain. The applause that followed was subdued but heartfelt, an acknowledgement of something precious shared. Backstage, Mei-Lin was surrounded by orchestra members offering congratulations. The first violinist who had doubted her during rehearsals was among the first to approach. "I've played that concerto with soloists for 20 years, she said. "But never like that, never." Conductor Lee couldn't stop smiling. "I knew you were good when I heard the rehearsal, but this was something else entirely." As Maylene made her way through the crowd of well-wishers, a woman approached her. "Excuse me, Ms. Chen, I'm from Central Music Agency. We represent concert pianists internationally. I'd like to discuss your future performances if you have a moment." Before Maylene could respond, another voice interrupted. "I'm afraid you'll have to get in line. Ms. Chen already has several offers to consider." It was Director Wu, who had called her just 3 days ago. She slipped a card into Maylin's hand, including an invitation to become our permanent featured soloist for the season. For a moment, Maylin couldn't speak. 3 days ago, she had been a piano teacher giving lessons in a converted storage room. Now people were lining up to represent her, to book her, to hear her play again. I need some time to think," she finally managed to say. As the crowd of admirers continued to grow, Maylin felt a familiar hand take hers, her brother Tao, coming to rescue her. "The family's waiting in the green room," he whispered. "Want to escape for a bit?" She nodded gratefully, and he guided her through the backstage maze to a quiet room where her parents and grandmother waited. As soon as the door closed behind them, cutting off the noise and excitement, Maylin burst into tears, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming emotion of everything that had just happened. "You did it," her father said softly, embracing her. "You showed them all." Through her tears, Maylin smiled. "No," she corrected him gently. "We did it. All of us. Together." The morning after the concert, Maylin woke in her hotel room to the sound of her phone ringing. Still half asleep, she fumbled for it on the nightstand. "Hello?" she answered, her voice groggy. "Have you seen the papers?" It was Tao, his voice buzzing with excitement. "Or, well, you know what I mean." "Have you heard the news?" "I just woke up," she said, sitting up in bed. "What news?" "You're everywhere!" The music critic for the National Daily called your performance a revelation. The City Times said you were defined what it means to truly hear music. There's already a video clip going viral online. Someone in the audience recorded the end of your performance and the standing ovation. It's been viewed over 1 million times since last night. Maylin's hand went to her mouth. "That can't be right." "It is." Mom and Dad are beside themselves. Grandma keeps telling everyone in the building that her granddaughter is famous. And Mrs. Tanaka? Well, she's pretending to be cool about it, but I caught her wiping away tears while watching the news coverage. As Tao continued sharing reactions, Maylin's other line beeped with an incoming call. Then again. And again. "Tao, I need to go. My phone is going crazy." The next few hours passed in a blur of calls from journalists requesting interviews, concert hall managers offering performance dates, and music directors eager to work with her. By noon, Maylin's head was spinning with options and offers that would have seemed impossible just days ago. A knock at her hotel room door provided a welcome interruption. It was Director Wu from the foundation, bringing tea and a small breakfast. "I thought you might need sustenance," she said, setting down a tray, "and perhaps a moment to breathe." "May I come in?" They sat by the window, the sounds of the busy city below creating a backdrop to their conversation. "I won't take much of your time," Director Wu said. "I'm sure you're being inundated with offers right now." Maylin nodded, cupping her tea with both hands. "It's overwhelming. I don't even know how to begin evaluating all these opportunities. That's actually why I'm here. The foundation would like to offer you something beyond just our concert series. We'd like to provide management services, help you sort through these offers, build a sustainable career, ensure you're not taken advantage of in your contracts." "Why would you do that?" Maylin asked. "You barely know me." Director Wu was quiet for a moment. 20 years ago, I was a promising young cellist. I had talent, but not the connections or knowledge to navigate the professional music world. No one offered to help me, and eventually I gave up performing to work on the business side of music." She sighed softly. "What I heard last night wasn't just technical brilliance or emotional depth, though you have both in abundance. What I heard was a unique voice that deserves to be shared with the world. I don't want you to have to choose between your art and practical survival." Tears welled in Maylin's eyes. All these years she had fought so hard just to be taken seriously, just to prove she could perform despite her blindness. Now suddenly doors were opening everywhere. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Director Wu replied simply. "Let us help you. Let your music be heard." 3 months later, Maylin stood backstage at Lincoln Center in New York City. Since her breakthrough performance, she had played in 7 major cities, each concert more acclaimed than the last. Tonight would be her international debut, broadcast live to classical music stations around the world. 2 minutes. Ms. Chen, the stage manager said. Mei Lin nodded, her fingers moving silently through the opening of Beethoven's Emperor Concerto. She was no longer plagued by the paralyzing nerves of her first major performance, but a healthy flutter of anticipation still filled her stomach before each concert. Her phone buzzed with a text. She touched the screen and her phone read the message aloud in its electronic voice. We're all watching together at home. Mrs. Tanaka sends her love. Play from your heart. Mom, Mei Lin smiled. No matter how far she traveled, how prestigious the venue, her family remained her center. She had insisted that her first major payment go toward moving them into a better apartment, one where her father didn't have to work double shifts and her mother could finally quit her evening cleaning job. The door opened, and Conductor Patel, who had become a close friend and collaborator over these whirlwind months, entered. Ready to make some magic? He asked. Always, she replied with a smile. As they walked toward the stage, he described the hall to her as he always did before a performance. Full house tonight. The grand piano is positioned slightly left of center stage, 3 steps up to the platform. The orchestra is settled and ready. This had become their ritual, these practical details that helped Mei Lin create a mental map of each new space. What had begun as a necessity had evolved into a moment of connection between them, a reminder of the unique perspective she brought to each performance. The roar of applause as she entered the stage was something she was still getting used to. Gone was the polite, uncertain reception of her first major concert. Now audiences came specifically to hear her, their anticipation palpable in the quality of their applause. As she settled at the piano, adjusting the bench slightly, Mei Lin took a moment to ground herself. The journey that had brought her here, from that old upright piano in her childhood apartment to this gleaming grand on an international stage, seemed almost impossible. Yet here she was, the hall fell silent. Mei Lin nodded to Conductor Patel, and the orchestra began the majestic opening of Beethoven's 5th Piano Concerto. When her moment came to enter, her fingers moved with confident grace across the keys, drawing sounds from the instrument that seemed to fill not just the hall, but the very souls of those listening. In the months since her breakthrough performance, music critics had struggled to define exactly what made Mei Lin's playing so extraordinary. Some pointed to her technical precision, others to her emotional depth, but audience members often described it more simply. When she plays, you forget she can't see. Then you realize she helps you see things you've never noticed before. Tonight was no exception. As the concerto unfolded, Mei Lin created not just music but an experience that transported the audience beyond the confines of the concert hall. Her interpretation of the second movement was so achingly beautiful that Conductor Patel later admitted he had momentarily forgotten to cue the violins, lost in the sound world she had created. When the final triumphant notes of the concerto rang out, the audience erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Brava, brava!" they shouted as Mei Lin rose and bowed. After 5 curtain calls and an encore, she now always prepared one, Mei Lin finally returned backstage, flushed with exhilaration and the unique joy that came from sharing music at this level. A small crowd had gathered in the green room, music industry executives, fellow musicians, and a few journalists. But standing quietly in the corner was a face she hadn't expected, Mrs. Tanaka. "My teacher is here," she whispered to Conductor Patel. The older woman in the blue dress, by the door. He guided her through the crowd until she stood before her first mentor. "You came all this way?" Mei Lin asked, taking the older woman's hands in hers. "I wouldn't have missed it," Mrs. Tanaka replied, her voice thick with emotion. "When that little girl first played my friend's old piano, I knew she was special. But this..." She gestured toward the stage they had just left. "This is beyond even what I imagined for you." Later that night, after the reception and interviews, Mei Lin sat alone in her hotel room. She had asked her assistant to record the radio broadcast of her performance, and now she listened to it with critical ears, noting passages that could be improved, moments that had worked particularly well. As the recording ended, there was a knock at her door. "Ms. Chen?" It was the hotel concierge. There's a package for you. The package contained a small, beautifully crafted wooden box. Inside was a note in Braille and a recording device. Maylin ran her fingers over the raised dots of the note. To remind you of where your journey began, from your family, with love. She pressed play on the device, and the sound of an old, slightly out-of-tune upright piano filled the room. It was a recording of her very first recital piece from the school auditorium all those years ago. Played by her 7-year-old self, the simple melody, performed with a child's earnestness, brought tears to her eyes. Maylin sat in the silence after the recording ended, remembering the little girl who had once been told that professional performance would be impossible for someone who couldn't see the conductor, couldn't read sheet music conventionally, couldn't navigate a stage without assistance. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Director Wu. "I hope I'm not calling too late," she said, "but I have news that couldn't wait until morning." "What is it?" Maylin asked. "The Ministry of Education has approved our proposal. The Maylinchen Music Program for visually impaired children will launch next month in 5 cities, with plans to expand nationwide within a year." Maylin's hand flew to her mouth. This program had been her idea, using a portion of her concert fees to fund music education for blind children who, like her younger self, might have the talent but not the opportunity to develop it. "Really?" she whispered. "It's actually happening?" "Yes," Director Wu confirmed. "And there's more. 3 of the major conservatories that once rejected your application have asked if you would consider teaching master classes next season." Maylin laughed through her tears. Life had a strange way of coming full circle. A week later, back home between concert tours, Maylin visited her old neighborhood. The building where she had grown up looked smaller somehow, the hallways narrower, the stairs steeper. But the memories were as vivid as ever. Mrs. Tanaka had kept her old studio open, though she no longer taught regularly due to her age. Today it was filled with a small group of visually impaired children, the first local participants in the new music program. Maylin sat at the same piano where she had learned to play, now properly tuned and refurbished thanks to her donation. "Before we begin," she said to the eager children, "I want to tell you a story about an old upright piano and a little girl who was told that she would never be able to perform for a real audience." As she spoke, her fingers began to play softly, a simple melody that grew more complex as the story unfolded. The children listened, entranced as she shared her journey from that first tentative scale to international acclaim. "The most important thing I've learned," Maylin told them as she finished her story, "is that music isn't about what you can or cannot see. It's about what you help others to feel." She guided a small boy's hands to the keys. "Now, who wants to be first to try?" As the child began to play his first notes, Maylin felt a sense of completion. Her journey had not been easy, but every step, every obstacle, every doubt, every moment of triumph had led her here, to this perfect moment of giving back. The boy hit a wrong note and stopped. Embarrassed. "It's okay," Maylin encouraged him with a smile. "Remember what I told you about mistakes?" The child nodded and repeated her words. "Sometimes the wrong note becomes the right one if you know where to take it next." "Exactly," she said. "Now let's continue." As the lesson progressed, Maylin thought about her upcoming world tour, the recording contract she had just signed, the honorary degree she would receive next month. All wonderful achievements, but somehow less meaningful than this moment. Sharing her love of music with a new generation. Opening doors that had once been closed to her. This, she realized, was her true triumph. Not the standing ovations or glowing reviews, but the chance to show others that limitations existed only in the mind, that with passion, determination, and the courage to take unexpected opportunities, anyone could create music that left the world speechless.